Hey there. Thank you for tuning in to the second part of our Taxonomy and Ontology webinar series. This is a series being hosted by the Swarm community. It's part of a three-part webinar series. The first was last week, Demystifying Taxonomies and Ontologies. It's available online. You can go and check it out if you didn't get a chance to watch it. Today, we're going to be discussing enterprise use cases of taxonomies and ontologies. And with that, I will pass the microphone over to Michael so he can introduce himself. Michael Andrews, Mike is yours.
Great, thank you. So I'm Michael Andrews. I'm a content architect and metadata consultant, and I've written a couple books about metadata as it relates to web content. So this is a topic of interest to you. You can check those books out on Amazon. And I'm happy to connect with any folks who have these interests on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn URL is there. And I'm joined today on this webinar by Prasad, who is going to be presenting about ontology. So I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Michael. I am Prasad Yalamanchi. I'm the CEO, founder of Lead Semantics. We are a developer of a product called Text Distill. As the name suggests, the product is meant to distill text. In this day and age, everyone is aware of ChatGPT and generative AI and things like that. It is in the same realm, so it is an AI solution. The twist is that it uses knowledge graphs and ontologies to extract actual knowledge that you can directly use in your workflows. And so that is the product. My own background is in computational linguistics to some extent, but mostly in knowledge and language solutions. And those that are interested in reaching out to me, my LinkedIn connection is here. I am looking forward to getting to present on ontologies after Michael, finishes his. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about taxonomies today, and we're specifically looking today at use cases in the enterprise. So one of the things that taxonomies let us do is track what content says. There's a famous management consultant named Peter Drucker, and he said many years ago something that's been quoted countless times, and he said, "You can't manage what you can't measure." And that's very, very true. But I'm going to suggest that we need to update this a little bit. And what I would say the update is that you can't manage what you can't classify. Because in order to measure something, you need to be able to classify things. We can't just presume that we know what it is we are going to be measuring. And that's where taxonomy really helps us out. Next slide. Next slide, if you could. Thank you. So we're going to be looking at two different dimensions for use cases for taxonomies. The first is, I'll be spending most of the time on is functional capabilities that taxonomies enable. So these are things that generic capabilities, anyone who uses a taxonomy can take advantage of these capabilities. Doesn't matter what industry you work in or what kind of job you have. These are capabilities that everyone can benefit from. I also, though, am going to share some domain-specific applications, and these I hope will give you a little bit more context in how taxonomies are being applied in enterprises. So these will focus more on maybe specific sectors or specific job roles. Next slide. So we can think about the functional roles of taxonomy as being of three kinds. And they build on one another. So they're almost like a pyramid. At the base is the idea that taxonomies can help us classify information. And this is really, really essential. You can't get anywhere until you have this ability to classify your information. Once you have that, that enables you to find and locate information much more easily. And then once you have that ability, you've classified the information, it enables you to find information more readily, then you can actually enumerate the frequency of occurrences in information. So this gives you even more capability. So I'll talk about each of these in turn. Next slide. Classifying information is done two ways. And we have a piece of content like we have on the right-hand side here. And this comes from a website from the National Institute of Health. I used to work on this website many years ago. We have some content here, and we can extract some information from this content. And by doing this, we can understand what this content's about. So there are some terms being used here. We see the word anemia in diagnosis. These may be terms in our taxonomy. We know that that's what this content is relating to. So that's very useful. We can easily know what the content pertains to just through a couple of terms like that. But there are other things we can do here. We can add information to this content to let us know what the content is for. Now, adding information is different than extracting information. For example, who is this content for? Well, it doesn't actually say who the content is for. You have to infer this. You see maybe at the top there it says, how will your doctor know you have anemia? So it's talking about your doctor. Now, if you were just to extract this and you saw the word doctor, you might say, well, the content's for doctors. But no, actually the content is written for patients because they're referring to your doctor. And this is something we can do. We can infer things from text and add information to it. And it's important to say know what audience something is for. And especially in something like a medical field, different content will be written in different ways for different audiences and may even use different kinds of language, for example. So two different ways we can classify information: extraction and adding information, or what's called annotation. Next slide. Another dimension to be thinking about when you're classifying information is, where is this information coming from? And we can think about this in a couple ways. One is we have some of our own content and data. It's proprietary to our organization. It may be content that we publish online. It could be contracts, product specs, operating procedures. All these kinds of things can benefit by being classified with a taxonomy. In those cases, it's really helpful to develop your own taxonomy, because this is content that's going to be very, very specific to your organization. And you probably are in the best position to know how you want to categorize this information. So developing your own taxonomy is a really beneficial thing to do. It's also possible to classify information that's coming from outside your organization. And this could be public data. There's all kinds of things that, say, the government publishes, regulations. There are public sites where filings are made, tenders, disclosures. People publish research as pre-publications. And you can often leverage a public taxonomy that already describes and categorizes a lot of this content. You may want to supplement it with some things of your own to give it more granularity about some specific aspects that you're most interested in, but relying on outside taxonomies can be very beneficial. Similarly, you may have access to proprietary content from other sources. Maybe it's something you license or something a partner shares with you, a business partner. And again, you may want to draw on taxonomies they have developed, or you may need to use your own. Next slide. There are a lot of different domains that taxonomies can classify, and I just want to give you as a sampling here of things. So we'll give you an idea of all the different ways taxonomies are used. So taxonomies classify goods. An example of that would be like a tariff schedule if you import goods into a market. We can classify companies according to things called standard industrial codes. So Europe and the United States and other locations have these codes that classify industries, and that allows you to see which companies are involved in which industries. If you have medical disorders and treatments, like we were looking at just a moment ago, those are classified by medical taxonomies, and there are several public medical taxonomies, quite extensive, been in development for many years, and they're available for people to use. What we eat, our food, is classified with taxonomies, and these things help to maintain food safety. They help to determine the ingredients in food, a very important system. The United Nations has a taxonomy that is used around the world. Different accounting systems in the US and globally have taxonomies, and these classify earnings and expenses. And then recently, there have been the development of something called green taxonomies. This is happening in Europe and the United States. And they look at activities and the environmental impact of these activities. So lots of different possibilities. This is just scratching the surface, but I just wanted to let you know how detailed some of these taxonomies can be. Next slide. Mentioned earlier about internal content, and this is your organization's content. Now, what kinds of things might you want to classify in a taxonomy relating to your own content? Well, you probably already have some kinds of classifications in your organization. You have lines of business and track things for budget purposes, and maybe some of these things are useful for developing your own taxonomy. But some of the things that you can do is you can come up with a taxonomy for customer segments that you have. Product lines, I mean, maybe you have different brands, different families of products, different models of products. These can all be classified by taxonomies. Facilities, so you have different kinds of offices and warehouses and other kinds of things like that that can be classified. Things like sales territories or distribution territories, really useful when you're looking at where products are available. They might be used even to figure out things like localization requirements for your content. And then most organizations don't do things by themselves. They have partners, suppliers, and you can look at the roles these different third parties have and classify them with the taxonomy as well. Next slide. So that's about the classification, and the classification lets us discover content much more easily, rather than hoping that specific words mentioned in the content and that we have typed in a request in a search for that exact word. The taxonomy gives us the ability to identify whatever content we're interested in with a lot of precision. And this helps people internally in our organizations. They can locate assets and documents and repositories and most organizations have this stuff scattered all over. There are just a lot of different places that worthwhile information is being stored, and a taxonomy can essentially bridge across these different repositories. And it can improve the search. So some people have set up, say, federated search, which draws on a taxonomy, and then wherever it's being stored, it's able to locate it. The same principles apply to external users. So they need to be able to find our content too. And this can help to index our own search that we offer in our websites and our apps, customers needing to find very specific pieces of information, maybe some support documentation, things like that. Or it can be useful to help people find things we produced when it's submitted to a third-party platform. And there are really quite a big number of platforms that distribute content. Most business organizations have things where they're trying to promote content, or they have a regulatory requirement to submit content somewhere. And the taxonomy can really help with other people finding and being able to use our content. Next slide. One of the key things to think about when you think about content discovery is what questions do people have, and what kinds of things are they trying to get answered? And this is really what taxonomies do for us. They allow us to limit the question so we can, maybe filter it a bit. We do this by using narrower terms. So if you remember from our previous session, we talked about taxonomies having a broader and narrower term. So a narrower term can limit what's of interest, but we also can require that multiple terms be present. So this will limit the group of things that we discover. And the converse is true as well. I mean, maybe we need to have an expansive look at something. So we use a broader term, or we combine several terms where if any of them are there, it's going to be of interest to us. So it really depends what our goal is. Next. And this is an example, I think, of how taxonomies can answer questions for us. I came across this example very recently. It's from the US Department of Energy, and it's looking at electric vehicle charging stations. So a very specific area. And the key issues in electronic vehicle charging stations is, where do they go? And that involves, where would someone have permission to put them? Who controls that space? And who would have access to that space? So it gets into things like parking. What are the different kinds of parking? Is it very short term? Is it longer term parking? Is it parking owned by an individual, or is it group parking? And these turn out to be concepts. And if you remember from our previous session, we talked about taxonomies representing concepts rather than just specific labeled words. So we have these concepts, and they drive a lot of decisions around who may make parking available for electric vehicle charging stations, and how owners of electric vehicles might be able to access these charging stations. So it's a very practical thing. It's not just being done because we like to organize our socks in our drawer. It really does give us some benefits here. Next slide. Now, I use the word content discovery rather than search because it's much bigger than search. Now, search is obviously very important. We have the ability to, create a search, specify what we want, but we're getting things given to us in more and more ways. I mean, we now have chatbots, particularly AI chatbots, which use natural language interfaces. So it's great. We can just ask questions in a very natural way. A lot of times we get things through alerts, for example, and taxonomies can support the alerts that we get. Personalization is something that organizations want to provide their customers. It's very efficient for the customers to get what's relevant to them, and taxonomies can support that. And then finally, taxonomies can support rule-based automation. So it can help inform what the next step in a process is. And this is making a lot of processes smarter. Next slide. And then the last area is around analytics. So this is probably the area that is least tapped by organizations, even if they are using taxonomies. Currently, they may not be doing much with this, but there's a lot of interesting potential here. So taxonomies, they can summarize what the content is about. They can summarize the concepts the content relates to. And that's really useful because we now can measure these things. So going back to what I said earlier about, you can't manage what you can't classify, that classification allows us to measure things. Next slide. So this is an example I showed in our prior session. It's a screenshot of an article talking about a company that is spinning off part of its operations following a merger attempt that they decided not to go through with. And we looked at this with classifying it with the taxonomy from the IPTC. That taxonomy part is shown below here. So this is giving us a really good summary of things that this article is talking about. Now, think about what we gain when we do this again and again. We start getting the power of scale here, and this lets us develop a lot of interesting insights. Next slide, please. So analytics can draw on taxonomies and give us insights across different sources and at different times. And so we may have a very targeted focus. We may want to track one specific thing, that's of high interest to us. We're really interested in electronic vehicle charging stations, for example, and we want to see, are people talking more about them now compared to 12 months ago? Or are they talking about them less? It's an interesting question because there's a lot of activity out there, people talking about the importance of having reliability for being able to charge their vehicle's batteries. So we can track that very specific thing over time. But we also have the ability to compare different concepts. So we can compare mentions of things from different sources at a particular point in time. We can compare the prevalence of a concept in, say, different regions, even if it's all coming from the same body of content, but it's addressing different regions. So you may be interested in tracking how much customers are interested in something in one region versus another. And then comparing trends over time for different concepts. So we had an example earlier of looking at corporate restructuring, and so what are the trends there? Are leverage buyouts becoming more or less important compared to corporate takeovers? That's the kind of thing that taxonomy used in an analytic capacity can help us answer. Next slide, please. And finally, I just want to give some examples of very specific uses of taxonomies for discovery and monitoring and analytics. So these will be specific to different industries or job roles. So a lot of this is useful when you're looking at things outside your organization. So a lot of financial institutions and other organizations that have a fiduciary responsibility have a requirement to know their customer. They can't take just a customer's statement at face value. They have to do some diligence on that to really understand the customer is who they say they are. So taxonomies can help us to see information about that customer and piece together if they are who they say they are. This can be useful in things like legal discovery. There's often mountains of files that come back in legal discovery, and the taxonomy can help make sense of what is there. It's very useful in competitive intelligence to track companies and products and patents, things like that. And more generally for market analysis. So you may not be focused on a specific company, you may just be looking at a market segment and wondering what kinds of activities are going on there. What are the trends? What are the conditions? What are the factors that are influencing that segment? Really useful for things like monitoring regulations and legislation that are in development. There's often a lot of text specifically there that is hard to digest, and taxonomies can help us to track all the changes that are going on while things are in development. Sometimes a clause will just drop out or be popped in at the last minute. And more generally, just any kind of trend analysis benefits from taxonomy. So you may be looking at social trends. You may be trying to understand trends in a customer segment, young customers, for example, and looking at, their spending habits or lifestyle habits, and taxonomies can help with that kind of analysis as well. Internally, we can use taxonomies to support a lot of different things. Workflow management, as I mentioned briefly earlier, we can use that to help inform things that we need to do in workflows. Really beneficial for business analytics. So you can use taxonomies to understand your customers' preferences and behaviors and activities. And also for operations, useful for understanding things like supply chains or customer service. And then lastly, a really, really common use of taxonomies is to track and manage digital assets. And when you do that, you can start getting insights into how your digital assets are being used. So digital assets can be very expensive. You spend a lot of money commissioning them or paying licenses to use them. And taxonomies can help you understand where they're being used, how much they're being used, and ultimately how much value you're getting from them. That's a short introduction to some of the use cases for taxonomies, and they are very helpful also in supporting the use cases that ontologies support. So Prasad is going to talk a bit about use cases in the enterprise for ontologies next.
Thank you so much, Michael. I would like the audience and the participants to know that taxonomies and ontologies are two subjects that really go hand in hand. One of the things that you may have heard Michael mention, I'm sure you have heard, the concepts, unlike just the labeled words or words as labels, the concepts are like the real handoff, the batons that get carried over into the ontologies. All of the ontologies are kind of pretty much revolving around these concepts. With that, I will start off with my part of the presentation. Yeah. So I'll just give a quick overview of what an ontology is. Clearly, we have touched upon this area in the last session, but this is just one slide to just cover the initial what ontology is. It is. Yeah, it's a readable, machine readable semantic model of a subject area. And when we say a subject area, what is it that you actually are encoding in a machine readable format? And those are the concepts, concepts central to that subject area. And these concepts are classes once they get their manifest into the formats that we talk about, and apply all the concepts of computer science and so on. They become classes. So not only are we tracking the concepts, we are also tracking interrelationships, and that's what is an ontology. It captures the what it is possible in the world related to these concepts, how they can come together, all the possible different things, the potential relations, the potential objects themselves. That's what an ontology captures. And furthermore, it's like the meaning that is implicit in the relations that you are talking about. And it's the way it gets manifest into these encoded formats and serialized formats that computers can understand are these so-called triples, or three things, two edges and one node. And the two nodes are like the subject and object, as you see in the picture here. Subject and object connected with an edge in the middle that has a relation that explains how this subject is connected to this object. And objects can be, objects in their full right. They are like instances of concepts. Like a car means, your Toyota car, or a Hyundai, whatever. Versus a literal, which is like a date, for example, or a string, a name, things like that, which do not have to be a proxy to something else. They themselves are everything that they want to communicate. So, and those are the things that you kind of capture within the ontology. So everything related to that subject area at the core essence of it, in terms of the concepts and their interrelationships. And these are constructed in a formal specification language. OWL is one of those. OWL stands for Web Ontology Language. There are others, but OWL is the predominant one that kind of gets used more often in the enterprise these days. Next slide, please. So why do enterprises build ontologies? That is a classic question. I mean, there have been other modeling, technologies, techniques that have been around for decades and decades, and massive systems have been built on that, successfully so. But why ontologies, which seem pretty complicated right from the shoot? One important thing is that organizations that have been in this IT, flow have experienced building a lot of systems, built with different teams, and built by different departments within the companies and so on. They have seen these systems grow beyond a threshold of complexity. It's not only individual systems grow in complexity because of the kind of features and functions as they grow to service to the end users, because of the longevity that they have been successful at, the sheer number of systems even, and so just the complexity is unmanageable. And most of these big companies have experienced that, and so they were trying to look for a way out of this, because complexity is unmanageable, and as such, any business that's planning for a quarterly report would not want to deal with that. They would want to have a finger on the pulse and be able to control that. If you break that complexity down, it is due to the fact that the applications and IT systems that are part of the purview of an organization, these large organizations, they're all siloed. So a department would try to build an application, and so they would have certain database in mind. The database would have its own schema, and so on. I mean, you see that replicated over and over within the organization. And so one department and one application would not be easily talking to the other application from another department, even another application from the same department, even across times. It is a sheer nature of how humans kind of come to interact when they're faced with deadlines, and when they're faced with what they have to immediately service. And that's a classic case. And so it's only in retrospect that you would see, oh, I would have done this in order to see these two applications work together, and so on. So these schemas that actually service these individual siloed applications are not modular to begin with. They are not part of the functional requirement of the original design, because that is not what gets the application going in terms of delivering its core functionality. interoperability and modularity are not, they are not something that you can put a finger on. And so they are never meant to be modular to begin with. They were not planned to be modular, rather engineered to be modular. And so you cannot repurpose on the other end. Once you have a schema working, a popular application, now we want to reuse it somewhere else. I mean, you would be lucky to use it as it is, much less use parts of it, because it was never designed in a modular fashion. So it's not reusable, so to speak. And so the complexity grows as new systems. And someone famous has famously said, this leads into software wasteland, waste islands all around, and something to that extent. And that's what organizations are facing with. And the root of all this, one of the things is fundamentally is the concepts that we have been talking about on the previous slide, as well as the root of defining ontologies and such. With an older, not I wouldn't say older, but a different type of pursuit and a target, the concepts themselves are not properly given the body in a manner that lends them to evolve over time to changing needs of your understanding of the concept itself, because concepts rarely are rigid in their in their formulation to begin with, because you are driven as a human, as engineers, as trained skilled people. You're looking at a set of requirements, and those requirements drive you to conceptualize certain things, and you embody them into one particular an item, a concept, a class, so to speak. And then soon as the application gets rolling, the use cases evolve, the users always want more, and so the requirements change. The concepts themselves are now tagged with tracking more. And if the original design or original technique did not have the capability to evolve organically, and there you go. I mean, the systems have a breaking point. And you put that across all these hundreds and hundreds of concepts that come together to give out all these applications. So such is the case of what these organizations were facing. And semantic modeling, one of which we talked a little bit more on our last session. I don't want to stress too deeply here, but it is based on the meaning of what these concepts stand for in terms of where they derive their meaning in the real world. And so you have more basis than your immediate circumstance within an organization, within a systemic operation of an organization. And so you have something to back it up with, and so it has a lot more longevity, and it turns out it is one of the powering aspects of what semantic modeling can give you. And semantic modeling is what leads you to come up with ontologies. And central to that is for every concept that you think of, you come up with a unique ID. If you want to formulate that into an encodable something that computers can understand, a global unique ID is very important, and there is fantastic support in semantic modeling. And in fact, semantic model itself is rooted in standards. These are W3C standards. The unique IDs and how you encode all the information within these ontologies is using RDF. And the modeling itself is OWL, Web Ontology Language, as we talked about. And once you create all your concepts and your instance data, once they are all encoded, you have to store them somewhere, and these go into standard triple stores, RDF triple stores, so-called. Those triples, as I said, subject, object, predicate stores. There are standard ways to kind of design those systems as well. And next comes the query language for these, and Sparkle is the standard for it, and so on. So this W3C standards, World Wide Web standards, are powering this. And so semantic modeling, as novel as it may sound, it is actually not novel. It is actually as old as the rest of the IT technologies. Probably it was incubated much more so in the academic grounds than in the industry for a long time. But over the last 10, 15 years that I know of, that it has really taken off in the industry. And on the right-hand side, the image is showing you different standards. And those that are interested can look into it. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I will give some broadly the big use cases of ontologies. One is, and this is something that we discussed in the last session, the basic power of an ontology comes from its unambiguous power of communicating the knowledge. And this communication is not only to humans, it is also to machines. So in the sense that once you encode your ontology in owl language, it is machine readable. In other words, machine can draw inferences much like the humans are expected to from looking at the same owl ontology. Ontology is model knowledge, and as such they are rooted in real world, and so it becomes the basis for easy integration, some of which was a problem for older technologies, lack of that, of being rooted in the real world. And it is based on W3C standards. So these are all the good things about ontologies. And what that lets the enterprises do is design their knowledge graphs, build their knowledge graphs by building ontologies. And knowledge graphs have proven to be a pretty valuable artifact within an organization. Putting all the information of the organization in a knowledge graph that is conforming to an enterprise ontology has proven to support decisions to a far more extent than any other technology that I know of, and it's been written about as well. And knowledge is machine readable, and in that sense, I mean, it allows for automated decision support. So there are plenty of imaginative solutions that can be planned around this particular capability. And the other thing is which very relevant, content, which is unstructured text, a lot of it is full of knowledge, and that can be tapped once you have your ontologies. And once that knowledge is tapped, that can be, marshaled into a knowledge graph, and make it support all kinds of applications, decision support applications, and whatnot. So text, which is pretty much dormant in terms of how it plays into your decision making in an organization, suddenly comes alive even as it is. So that is one of the big advantages of having an ontology centric organizations. And in this day and age, you can go further than talk about without talking generative AI and LLMs and so on. And knowledge graphs have their play along with LLMs, and ontologies go hand in hand with that. And they let you upgrade so-called these popular RAG systems to graph RAG. RAG stands for retrieval augmented generation, which is sort of an additional technique. If you lap on top of an LLM, it gives you the chance to get natural language queries answered from data from a set of documents without having the hallucination problems and so on. And so RAG has been widely popular in the last 6 months that I know of, but it still has certain drawbacks, and all of which are kind of covered in graph RAG, which is the later technique. And so an ontology kind of lets you move from your RAG techniques to graph RAG. The other thing is ontologies allow you to ground LLMs to control hallucinations, and they let you focus the LLM to a domain, much like the RAG. But ontologies are a lot more rigorous, and they let you put it into a workflow even. And in that sense, they allow for complex workflows automatically. And by extension, there is a lot of talk about AI agents and such. You cannot have agents without automated, negotiation between agents, and that kind of a negotiation cannot happen without an ontology. What to expect and what to send. It's like jumping over a synapse between two neurons. So you need to know what to capture. What to receive is meaningful and so on. So an ontology has the rightful place in something like that. It may not have been talked about in such a context, but by extension, people can easily connect to that. Next slide, please. So ontologies are pursued by big enterprises. They are in all kinds of industry verticals. They are everywhere. They are literally in domains, big domains that we come to interact with on a day-to-day basis, like finance, legal, banking, governments, military, life sciences is a big area, climate, transportation, supply chains, education, geospatial, cybersecurity, name it. I mean, every field, as we said, the complexity, once it crosses a certain threshold, and I would dare to say, once you have more than one application by the same set of group of people, you're almost losing value if you did not pursue ontologies. So more and more people are realizing ontologies are more than just like an IT technique. It is more fundamental than that. It's more of organizing your information, and it's knowledge. It's organizing your knowledge. Can I go to next slide, please? Yeah. So what are some of the ontologies? So we have mentioned, they are in every industry, so to speak. Big companies, leading edge companies, have been doing these knowledge graphs and ontologies for some time. Some of those ontologies that are well known, that are on the web, I'll just go one by one here. FOAF is a friend of a friend. It stands for, as it expanded, social networking sites and so on. This particular ontology kind of helps you build or understand unambiguously what types of relationships are at the core for a social network. Like a friend is a friend of another friend, and this friend is following the other friend, and so it's a graph of people and all the related concepts that come into play there. So that ontology is FOAF. It's on the web and it's free. It's been used elsewhere in many ways. And one more such a thing on the web is SKOS, SKOS. It stands for Simple Knowledge Organization System. And this is classical, of course, knowledge organization system, where knowledge starts to become formal is, as Michael was talking about in taxonomies and such. If you want it to be computable and computer readable or machine readable, SKOS is one of those ontologies that captures, the narrower, broader that Michael had mentioned, those types of concepts among all the, taxonomic entries. And it's a popular one that has been used. It's like a fundamental wrapper as you move from taxonomies to real ontologies with all kinds of relationships and all this complex application related meaning that you impose on these models. Schema.org is another popular. It's more of a it's an ontology. It's more of a namespace, the vocabularies and terminologies that are standard for search engines. All these big organizations like Google and Microsoft and those folks use these things to understand web pages and what a certain web page stands for. The essential or core concepts that it revolves around among many are persons, like places, products, and even in products, for example, the location, the time of day, operating hours, and things of that kind that normally you would want to search for, like when you're looking for certain coffee shops in an area, for example. So search engines would have to bring up not only just the names but all the other information, like the opening hours, the cost maybe, and ratings, and all of those things. That terminology, that vocabulary is standardized, and that is part of the schema.org. These are all on the web. I encourage you to explore that if you haven't done that already. It's a very popular one. DBpedia ontology is another big one. This is like the ontology of global knowledge that as you would come to interact with in Wikipedia. And so not only as humans, we go to Wikipedia to search for certain information that we look for, but as a system developer or an application developer, if you want to automatically get some standardized knowledge, information about elections in the US, maybe there are a whole bunch of pieces of information that you want to draw into your own application, and so on and so forth. There are thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of concepts, and so on. So that's a fantastic resource for all kinds of stuff. It's been used for news in many ways. I know from my own experience, we have done that quite a bit, going to DBpedia ontology to get additional aspects of people that you may have, people, things, whatever concepts, events from regular news. And then you want to kind of extrapolate that to what is already standardized, and you want to back it up with something standard. And AgriWalk is one of those big vocabularies that is food and agri organization of the UN. It's pretty large, I would say, ontology that uses SKOS to the max. It may be one of those exemplary use cases of how SKOS was used. And similarly, FIBO in the regular industries that we come to look for as enterprises, like it's the financial industry business ontology. It talks about standardizing all the terminologies revolving around financial instruments. This particularly, if I remember right, in 2008, after the financial debacle, um, the core problem around that time was the visibility or lack of visibility of risk when you are looking at an instrument. There was all these fancy names, credit default swaps, or something like that behind the screens that would completely morph the instrument that you're looking at. And so the risk that you may be looking at initially as some kind of a mortgage has been tenfold morphed into something else. And so in order to handle that, make it much more transparent in the reporting by these financial institutions, I think this effort was started out, and it is one of the largest I know of. I think it's fairly large. I mean, I have a full slide on that and getting into detail about it. We'll get to explore that a little more. So that is FIBO. And legal, there is another ontology. It's SALI is the organization. It stands for Standards Advancement for Legal Industry. And the essential taxonomy and an ontology for that is the legal matter specification standard. It's again, once you have this ontology that's public and it's standard, it makes that much more easy for individual a law firm or a financial services firm to kind of really come up with their own applications and feel a little bit easy that whatever you may have come up with can be integrated with the data in that field from some other organization, or maybe you want to publish your own information on the web to some other organization and your own audience, and it is received with prior knowledge, given that it is backed by these standards. And medical is a big area. Gene ontologies, I mean, there are a whole bunch of ontologies in the space. I'm just giving you a sample of these public ontologies. There are hundreds, thousands of ontologies that are already there. And QDT is one other exciting, interesting, very formal ontology, very scientific ontology, so to speak. It is about quantities, units, dimensions, and types. It lets you kind of measure or align your measurement. You may be measuring your distance in kilometers here. In the UK, it may be kilometers, and in the US, it's miles. And so if you're measuring distances, how do you automatically, so all of those automated stuff that is possible through these ontologies, you can reason about, and things like that. So and ontologies can be big, as we talked about, like FIBO and all these big things, and they can be small, granular, focused on one singular concept, even broader singular concept, like time ontology here. Time ontology is talking about all the essential core aspects of time, like date, time, duration, instant, interval, and so on. So an ontology is a set of classes and relationships, as we talked about, and there are visualization tools that let you use. Maybe you're interested in understanding this time ontology that has been designed by somebody else, and it is made public by W3C, the standards organization. You can easily draw down. You can import this ontology to your own use case and feel comfortable that it is that these are all standard names for what you think may be a month of an year. So the way you use it, and whether it's a class, property, and things like that, when you attach your own data, it can be pulled by other query engines and things like that, and made perfect sense, like the way you intend it to be. On the right hand side is a visualization of this ontology in a tool. I may not have too much time to go through this, but I will have a chance to go through in the next slide about a different tool. Next slide, please. Yeah, here we'll get into this FIBO a little bit. Maybe spend 2 minutes in an ontology editor. We said FIBO is a big, ontology, and just to get a sense of the sheer size of it, it's about 200 different ontologies that come together, under the auspices of FIBO, under the, what's touted as FIBO. It's across 10 plus domains, and these numbers keep changing. And so I am only a user, so whenever I probably looked at it about a year ago or so. And they are classified into business entities and loans and securities, all of the things that you normally associate with the financial industry. They're organized into, because of the sheer size, I mean, you would want it to be bite size at times for just management purposes. It's broken into subdomains and modules, and in the end it's several thousands of classes and properties. And as I said, it's meant to make these financial instruments be transparent. When you report about it, or financial institutions, when they report about their instruments, to make them interoperable and transparent to the regulators and other institutions. So here I would want to segue and probably show. I'll share my screen briefly. I'm assuming you're all able to see my screen.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Yeah. So this is a tool called Prodigy from Stanford. It's a free ontology editing tool. The idea here is not to educate on the tool. I'm sure it's a public, and you all can get at it. The idea is to show FIBO here. So I will just show certain things. So this is a class hierarchy. Yeah, and within the class hierarchy, you're seeing all these different classes, so to speak: agreement, commitment, concept, income, and you get the point. I mean, these are all different classes, and it kind of we talked about 4,000 classes, and and properties and so on. So these are kind of you will expect to find all of those things one way or another somewhere in here. So I'll just show you a few things. Maybe agreement, is the first one. So we'll click on that. See, you would normally expect like an agreement, a contract is an agreement, and things like that. And so you can go in here, and transferable contract, and on the right hand side is the definition of the thing. So such is an editor. When you are ready to do your own ontologies, you will probably start with just the thing, and so our next session is getting into some of this, how to actually create an ontology. But here is an enterprise ontology, large scale, real world, big ontology, that you can get an idea of what it is. I mean, you can get the class, pictures of how these things are. So the definitions, and so promissory note itself is a subclass of written contract, and on and on. So this is the idea, just to give you all an idea of what these ontologies are all about. These are classes, and these properties are so you can go into these properties also, and again, these properties are there are plenty of properties, like for example, you can take something has a subsidiary, this is a sub property, and this is unique about semantic modeling and so on. Sub properties is not a usual thing you run into in other modeling languages, but it does capture some very unique stuff that is possible to model within the domain. And so these are the essential things, and individuals are the actual instances that you may actually run into. Like you can actually track the specific exemplary individuals, like that could come from your taxonomies and so on. So as you can see, taxonomies and ontologies really play hand in hand. And by the time you're done with an ontology, for example, you have a full understanding, unambiguous understanding of what these concepts are, how these concepts interrelate with other concepts. Each concept has what types of properties and what types of values that these properties can hold, right? So everything is in place, so that now you need to get the data from the real world. Your transactions will produce this real world data of what a real world promissory note is. You attach an ID, and then it's an instance that goes into against this promissory note. So that's how you populate the entire database, so-called the triple store of the data within this RDF data flow. And then once you have all that, this metadata lets you guide and make sense of it. And so majority of the applications of a semantic model are just queries. Unlike in the other technologies, where you would have to come up with a way to transfer your algorithm into a programming language, and then a query language, and all of that. Whereas in a semantic modeling and model with ontologies, all of that it just comes down to traversals, majority of it. And of course there could be a layer of applications, but majority of it is traversals among these things, because it's so unambiguously laid out for you, all the interrelationships and things like that. And Another beauty of these ontologies is that you can keep evolving these concepts. The concept of a promissory note, in a particular use case, may require that it may have another concept to be tied into it, and it can be attached on the fly. So I don't want to get into too much detail here, just to kind of give you all a sense of what this is at this point. So I will go back to my thing, and can I go to the next slide, please? Yeah, and so I'll just conclude here. So one of the ways that if you are trying to get into your own ontology development, you would want to look for in your domain area what other ontologies are, what are the ontologies that may exist on the web. There are plenty. Rarely you will go without having a well acceptable starting point already that's there. And so it comes down to how well you can reuse these ontologies. And so if you are looking ahead, you will want to look beyond the immediate, so that you are able to appreciate what is there out on the web, how it fits into what may be possible, what may be required, a little bit outside of your immediate scope. Look at your available ontologies. They serve as what is known as upper ontologies, in the sense that you need not use the entire 5,000 class, the FIBO, for your application. And it's very well modularized. And oftentimes you may want to just use one concept out of this big mass of an ontology. You can import the ontology. These files are not that big. It's all textual. And then you can use one class for your particular purpose. Maybe it is a particular loan, and all the associated terminology that you want to leverage. And then you add your own things, you subclass, and all of those things that we can talk later on in a subsequent session. And that's how you leverage what is already there, and you can feel good that it is standards compliant, or at least the data that you produce out of your applications can feed into or flow into other applications that use these standards. Such is the benefit of using these public ontologies. And next slide, please. And so with this, I would like to close. So leading edge, organizations, businesses, they have been building these ontologies and knowledge graphs for some time now, maybe over a decade or more. And currently, there is a big rage of this generative AI, and it elevates the urgency of these knowledge graphs. On the left-hand side, if you notice, this is a screenshot of a presentation slide by Gartner at a conference. They are clearly talking about, this is not too long ago, maybe months ago, maybe at most. It's about knowledge graphs being pretty relevant, and they are complementary to LLMs. In that sense, and knowledge graphs and ontologies go together. And so why the big companies and leading edge companies only, right? I mean, so every other company necessarily, if they want to compete, and may want to look at building their own ontologies and knowledge graphs. And the other thing that really is a shot in the arm for them is that it is standards based, and so standards are there. They're mature ecosystem of tools and vendors, and most importantly, there are best practices and skill sets that are available. With that, I will close. I'll pass it back to Joaquin.
Yeah, so I hope you got a lot of juice out of this one. It's not such a walk in the park as the one that was before, demystifying taxonomies and ontologies. You can clearly see how we start to get deeper into the details as to how these systems help us make sense out of such a dynamic and complex world. And as such, there's some simple rules and concepts that help us make sense of these things, but nonetheless, we're working with very ambiguous, obfuscated things. If you have any questions, we're happy to take some now. We're going to have the next one on April 3rd, I believe. I'll confirm in the comments below. That's going to be a presentation about how we can implement this. Basically, we're going to talk about the methodology of implementing enterprise taxonomies and ontologies. So if you got if you get the primer in the first one, and you're getting more into the details in this one, the next one is going to give you an idea of what this construction, what this methodology looks like. But yeah, with that, if you have any questions, we're happy to take them. And you know, yeah. Someone said, I have to go, but I got a lot of value from this. Thank you, Michael and Prasad.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to hear. Yeah, we definitely know this is these are topics that people have maybe a little familiarity with, but not everyone really knows a lot of the details. So just trying to give people an example of the kinds of things involved, some of the opportunities here. And as Prasad's been mentioning, there is growing interest. And so whatever your knowledge level is right now, it's probably a useful career thing to get more knowledgeable about this, because I do think um, it's starting to get even more traction in organizations. As they wrestle with all these issues of the volumes of content and data, the need to sort of connect things across from different sources and make sense of it. These are the kinds of technologies that enable them to do more with it, with what they have.
And to add to Michael's, I would add a contemporary note to this. In the world of generative AI, to make generative AI really work for you in a manner that you can really depend on the results that it produces, ontologies and knowledge graphs and graphs have more than one way have been shown to be the go-to technology. And in that sense, they really have given themselves a fresh lease, if you will. As I mentioned, these technologies were rooted in a lot of academia and academic pursuit, but now they have a pretty strong academic, industrial, and practical value.
If I may add just a bit from my perspective, from the realm of operations or consulting, um, divide and conquer via taxonomies, even from a crude conceptual standpoint, or learning more about how to integrate concepts that are like and related to each other. Um, these are invaluable tools that bridge into standard operating procedures, understanding how you want to break down knowledge, corporate knowledge. Really, I mean, nobody really has a plan in place, or people have very poor ways of dealing with business continuity. Understanding how to compartmentalize information knowledge, it helps you think about, how do I preserve knowledge? How do I transfer knowledge to new employees? How do I cross train people? I mean, this has this knowledge branch has far-reaching impacts into the operational and knowledge hygiene of the organization. So um, it goes further than just library science. This is not a static way of dealing with the world. It helps you deal in a more dynamic fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, Prasad was talking about the 5.0 ontology, and how it allows the biggest financial institutions in the world to understand what are in different contracts. And that's important. I mean, it's that could prevent something really melting down. Having the ability to the traceability there of something like that. So organizations are relying on these things, and we see growth in the domains that are being covered by things. And the beauty of it is that you can connect different domains together too. So it can help you manage very, very specific things in a lot of detail, but it also can help connect relationships across domains that have interactions with one another. So, I think, for example, in the biomedical field, I mean, there's a lot of specialization, which is very, very important to have that data described in very granular detail. But you can also get in trouble if you're overly specialized and you don't understand the impacts from adjacent areas. And I think that's one of the real benefits of being able to connect things. The concepts connect together.
Absolutely.
So
I
really want
I
to,
think
yeah.
just to piggyback on that, I think one of the most mind blowing and thought provoking examples throughout my exploration in this space is how interconnected the world actually is. I mean, you have people that specialize in soil, and soil grows crop, and crop has nutrients and pesticides and chemicals, and that impacts population health because that's what people consume. So there's earth science, there's climate, there's agriculture, there's biochemistry, there's
Hmm.
supply chain,
Yep.
there's population health, and then there's healthcare and pharmacology, and all those things are mushed together in a steady chain of value-added activities. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, one of the defining things, defining value propositions of semantic technologies is the possibility, the prospect for integration, you know, across time, across space, systems that have been developed by different people, so on. That prospect is the single biggest draw. And the other thing is that, that it is standardized, so people can understand, across the board what it is. Yeah.
it appears that LinkedIn is throwing a little hissy fit again, and we're not getting comments, but I see it on my phone.
Hmm.
Sumyankata asks, it's always a pleasure to listen to Mr. Prasad. I have one question. I use SCOS for thesaurus development, but can we really use it for hardcore knowledge modeling?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I would encourage the person to. I didn't get the name clearly, but Agrovac. If you can put a message in the message, I'll be able to respond. Is a great example of how to use COS in uh, pretty serious, massive. Vocabulary and taxonomy being organized in a manner that is meaningful for different populations across the globe. So that could be one of those. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, how do we integrate metadata into all this stuff? How do we bleed metadata to linked open data or SCOS? What's that integration looking like?
Uh, did you want me to take a shot at that? Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. So, I mean, see, metadata is data about data, right? So, I mean, I'll talk about from an ontology perspective, because there's a lot of formal terminology around that. So all so-called the OWL structures and OWL terms, they all are there to help you formulate your metadata. Like what are the classes? And so you have your classes, right? And so if, what are the properties, all that is metadata. That's not instance data, so to speak. And metadata can really encapsulate, and Michael will probably have much better point of view on that. But what I can say is anything that you want to track, a lot of the configuration information about systems, a system that is fit in one particular use case. If you want to reorient and make it work in a different direction, different orientation by changing certain things, what are the parameters that you are modifying? And how do you label those things? What would be the, what are the actual, um, that would be the metadata. So so there are so many flavors of metadata that is possible. So all of that can be tracked as part of an ontology. You would want it to be tracked by an ontology if you want the machine to do, all of the stuff that we are talking about, as humans that we would want to do. So an ontology is like, machine readable extension of what humans were doing it for themselves, in an unambiguous fashion. When in trying to make it unambiguous for each other, we made the machine also be partake in that experience. That's what we are aiming with ontologies. And that's possible. All of the metadata has a place in ontologies like that, if you want it to be automated, for example. Does
Michael?
that, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think what Prasad has said is absolutely right. I mean, if you are looking at the ontology side of things, the data about the data model itself is useful for machines to understand, how they can interpret things, what actions they can take, things like that. When we look at the other case, though, if we just look at sort of the raw content that maybe is the basis for the data that becomes populated in a knowledge graph, that content itself can have some metadata associated with the instances of content. So that's just another kind of metadata as well. I mean, metadata is a very broad concept, and it just if you are a streaming video service, you have a lot of content there, and you have metadata about that content, about how long different videos are, and the different formats the videos are in, and things like that are metadata about the content assets themselves which are different than the data about the contents of the video, which would be the actors and the story title and things of that sort. So depends what it is what you need. If you're running a streaming service, you need to know how many, how big files are and things like that as well. So it really, the metadata is there to support your business goals, what you're trying to achieve.
I don't know if we have time for another question. I mean, it's up to you guys. I have one more question out of curiosity, and I'll let you guys go.
Please shoot. Yeah.
So with structured databases, I mean, we have a lot of structured data from things that come out of the box, CRM systems, marketing applications. I mean, there's just so many tools that operate on these rigid schemas. However, I've seen that it's possible to convert SQL database into a graph representation using the columns as a way to annotate what each table is about and what kind of instances have in terms of relationships. So how do we enrich that with more metadata? Because I think one thing is to repurpose a structured database into a graph, but I don't think it's nearly sufficient for reasoning or inference or further machine learning applications unless you kind of enrich it or annotate it further.
Right. If I may, you need to start off with what is the model on the semantic data side. See, you are able to reason to the extent that your model can support. Right? If the original model itself, whatever is in your relational database, your tables and columns and all the schema, if that is all your model is, then you are limited to just that. There has to be some guiding ontology, so to speak, that is a superset of the schema that you are absorbing. Assuming you are absorbing a set of schema and schema elements pertaining to that relational database and data store into an ontology that is a superset, same concepts and all of that, but it has additional properties, maybe additional concepts. Ontology connects all these concepts, and some of these concepts have been populated with the data through your columns and whatever the mappings that suitably are found their places in the ontology, on the target ontology. But then there are other concepts in the ontology. Now, how do so in an ontology, one concept and other concept, very likely they have some kind of a meaningful connection, maybe through other entities in the middle, maybe through other concepts. So now you can reason, what types of connections that are possible with the data that you have brought forth. And maybe there are certain gaps that original data didn't have, that the ontology, the scaffolding of the ontology will allow you to kind of, extrapolate that. Does that make sense? And so in
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that additional ontology, and ontology is like the metadata already, so that is, it is data about, what types of concepts that you are, instances that you are absorbing.
I'm not going to add anything to that one. I think it's a good answer, but I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. I mean, it's always a pleasure to share this with the folks, and I appreciate when people say that they're finding it helpful. So I do hope folks can join us again. We'll be meeting in 2 weeks' time, I think, for our session on putting this into practice, how organizations actually implement things. And so that will be very interesting, I think. So I hope you can join us.
Yep. Likewise. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, doing this presentation together with you guys. I hope the participants, have really gotten value. And that's exciting to hear, from the participants to the extent that we heard. Looking forward to the next session. I don't know within an hour's time how we will actually instrument something and make it work all in front of that'll be a challenge. Yeah,
we'll do it. All right, great.
Ciao.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.